Live. All right, good morning. A little wet out there, but otherwise good. Daf Yomi is sponsored by Yehuda Greenwood. Dischusa Refuah for Bailey Yendel. Bas Chaya Rachel. Also, if you are listening at home, it's too late, but you missed a great breakfast, which is coming up in an hour or so, an hour and a half. So that Yehuda is also sponsoring. We are on Pei Hamid Beis, the second Mishnah on Pei Hamid Beis. And we're dealing with kidnapping. Hagonev nefesh mi Yisrael. So we did this Mishnah last time. We'll just start by running through it. Right? Somebody who kidnaps, he's not chayiv until he removes the person from his original location and takes him into his own property. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheach liseno l'rishuso v'yishtamish bo. Two requirements: he has to take him into his possession, but also has to use him. Shenamar, the pasuk says, she's amar bo machro. He has to use him and sell him. That's the pasuk says. Question is going to be, what does the Tanna Kama do with the pasuk that clearly says this is required?
It's interesting. Not only do you have to bring him to your reshus, it's not even completed until you use
That's correct. Two-part process. Very important to note that because the Gemara is going to make a whole big discussion out of it. Hagonev es beno. Somebody steals his own son. Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan Mebroka mechayev. He says you are chayev for that. V'chachamim poacher, and the chacham say no, not so. Misha chetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. If you steal someone who's a half slave, half free person, as we described that case last time. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev v'cham potter. Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayev, and the chacham say you're potter. Let's get into the Gemara. V'Tanna Kama lo boy imor. How can the Tanna Kama ignore the pasuk? Pasuk says that you have to use the person. How can the Tanna Kama ignore the pasuk and say that that's not necessary? So I'm Rav Acha Brei de Rava. Rav Acha Brei de Rava says imor. It's not that it doesn't require the work, it's just that it doesn't require a significant financial gain in the work. That the Tanna Kama says work of any kind is considered to be enough to make the person who does the kidnapping responsible, whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, it needs to be a work of sufficient financial value, gain of a pruta, in order for you to be liable. So it's not that you don't have to work, it's just the value of the work that is the point of contention, as of course the pasuk says that you need it. But Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question. Ganvo machro yoshan. Let's say he kidnaps the person, and then he sells him while the fellow is still sleeping. Right? So mahu, what's the case in that? What happens in that case? Machar isha leubra mahu. What happens if he sells a woman that he kidnapped, but he's basically selling futures rights to the fetus that she is carrying? So in these circumstances, the real question is, you're not making use, you're kidnapping, you're selling, but you haven't made the person do any work because the person's asleep the whole time, or the baby's not born yet the whole time. So is there a way to make use of these people in these circumstances?
I would think you can't just sell because we did with the Paris. That you
can't sell for futures. That's right. Correct. So and aside from that, regardless, let's say even if you could, the pasuk specifies that you had to have used the person while they were in your possession. This sale already indicates that's the end of my possession. I'm not using.
Right.
So the answer is, the question really is, yesh derech imor bekach or ein derech imor bekach? Is there a way to use the person in this state or not? That's really the question. It's not typical work normally we would envision. But potentially there is a usage that we could use these people in these states for. For example, so they should say, well, maybe there's no work at all. This should be, therefore, there's no way to be liable for a death penalty for kidnapping. No, I do need it because there's a case. Yoshin de Zogolei. The sleeping person, you can lean on that person, right? You need a stender, you got a sleeping person, you put your book on him, right? Get some benefit out of that sleeping person. So the question is that considered to be sufficient usage or not? Because that's not really usage by a regular person, by the sleeping person, is it? Isha de'ukma ba'apezika. Also, is that right? Is that required? It doesn't say required that das is required. It says usage is required. So that's the question. So, and the other one is a woman who is pregnant makes a much better windscreen against wind, right? Don't tell your wives that. But that is the case, and therefore, right, so you can get an extra pruta of value for protection against the wind. So derech imor bekach, ein derech imor bekach. Is that going to be Is that going to be usage of the person, or is that not really usage of the person? Some minor usage of the person. So, what's the answer? We can have to hold on to Eliyahu Hanavi comes in order to ask that one. Tana Rabbanan. Ki yimatze ish gonev nefesh me'echov. Person, he's stealing a human being from amongst his brethren. Ein li ela ish shegonev isha. That implies a man is stealing a woman, right? Ish sheganav. Isha minayin. So that means a man is doing the kidnapping. A woman. How do I know if a woman does kidnapping also that she is liable? Because Pasuk says ish right? Ish gonev nefesh. So Talmud Lomar. Therefore, the answer is there's another pasuk that deals with kidnapping as well. This one is in Shmos. That first pasuk was in Dvarim Chaf Daled Zayin. This one is Shmos Chaf Aleph Tes Zayin. The gonev ish. Right? A man steals. Gonev ish. Person steals a man. So therefore, anybody. Right? Anybody who steals a man, then he's liable. So now, if you see these two psukim together, so the first pasuk tells me a man doing the thieving can steal anybody, a man or a woman. The isha sheganva, the second pasuk says, whoever is doing the stealing could be anybody, but the person who's being kidnapped has to be an ish, has to be a man. So isha sheganva isha minayin, the one case that is excluded is, what if a woman kidnaps another woman? If a woman kidnaps another woman, it's not included in either of the psukim. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, "Umeis haganav hahu," that kidnapper will die. Mikol makom. It says that gonev doesn't matter whether he's a man or a woman. He's just called a gonev, and that means that it doesn't matter.
So the female, if you still kidnap another woman, she's
going to be chayv misa as well. That's correct. It does not matter the sexes of the kidnapper or the person being kidnapped. Either way, always chayv misa. Tanya idach. Another brisa says. Ki matze ish gonev nefesh me'echov. Person is found kidnapping a soul from his brethren. Echad hagonev es ha'ish, ve'echad hagonev es ha'isha. Doesn't matter whether you're doing the kidnapping of a man or kidnapping of a woman. Ve'echad ger, ve'echad eved meshuchrar. For that matter, it does not matter whether the person being kidnapped is a convert or a freed slave, the katan or a child. They're chayav. All of these are liable. These are all Jewish people, and they're liable. Gonvo v'lo machro.
Finding them the kidnapping. But we just said he has to bring them to Rishus, and he has to
make some use and sell.
So, like catching someone loading a truck with kids wouldn't even be considered chayev. You'd be like
not chayev misa. We're going to see what you might be chayev. Might be chayev malchus, but we'll get there, right? But you're not going to be chayev misa. You're right until you are doing the selling, right? Human trafficking requires a buy and requires a kidnapping and a sale. That's correct.
Right.
That's really what you call it, human trafficking, because that's what he's doing, really. He's not just kidnapping, right? He's human trafficking. So, ganvo v'lo machro, as Brian was pointing out, let's say I steal a person but don't sell them, machro v'adayin yeshno b'rishuso. Let's say I sell him, but he's still in his original place.
Putter.
So then putter, that's good, right? Then you'd be exempt, right? Because you haven't fulfilled both halves of the requirements. Machro le'aviv o le'echov. Let's say the sale is you kidnap the person and you ransom him to his father, to his brother, or to another relative, then he's chayiv. That is also considered to be a sale according to this opinion in the Brisa. That's a sale, and therefore you are liable for that. Hagonev havadim, somebody steals slaves, so then he's pater. That is an exemption. Because we're going to see that the person is not in that category of mitzvos as you are, and therefore it does not apply.
But it said before, even where did it say?
Avadim meshuchrarim. Yeah, I had to look back there twice. Right,
Yeah.
Freed slaves. Freed slaves are your chai for. Regular avadim, you are not. Okay. Tana Kamid Rav Sheshus. Now we learned the Rav Sheshus somebody had taught a following brisa in front of Rav Sheshus. Amar le ani shomne Rabbi Shimon Omer. I learned like this. Rabbi Shimon says, "Me achiv ad shiyotzienu mirishus achiv." So he says that the pasuk says that you have to kidnap somebody from his brethren, which means that Rabbi Shimon says that you have to kidnap the person and he has to be sold away from his brothers, right? Away from his families. So v'atamar chayev, and then you said in the brisa that we just quoted that you would be chayev if you sell to his family. Right. This seems to imply that you're not chayev, right? So hamar chayev. So he says tani potter. So he says, okay, you're right. We got to change the girsa. The girsa is the girsa that you're bringing has to say potter. right? You're going to say that the person is exempt, right? If you stole from your brother, and if you sold it to father or brother, you are in fact exempt. Okay, so there's no stira between the brises. Okay, my kusha. So what's the big deal? Why is it that just because he quoted another brisa, why did you change the girsa? Maybe this brisa is Rabbi Shimon's opinion, the last brisa is the Rabbanon's opinion, and it's an argument. It's not that big a deal, right? We have arguments all the time. Why is this a problem? So lo sal kadaitoch, you can't say that because the Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Stam masnisin remeres is good rules of thumb. When you have a Mishnah and the person whose name is person who's saying the opinion in the Mishnah is not named, it's Rabbi Meir. Stam Tosefta.
Why don't you mention his name?
Because it's assumed that everybody knows it's Rabbi Meir. Because everybody knows this Gemara. That's what I'm saying. It's good to be able to point it out, right? This Gemara is important, right? If I see somebody's opinion, it's not mentioned, it's Rabbi Meir's opinion, and that's why it's good to know that, because when you see Rabbi Meir's opinion in another place, right, you have to be able, you can know that those two things should not contradict. So, Stam Tosefta, if I have a Tosefta, those are the additional brisos that explain Mishnayos. That's Reb Nechemiah's opinion. Stam Sifra is the Agadic explanations, whatever, combining two languages, right? It is the traditional explanations of brises based on Vayikra, Sefer Vayikra. So that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, and Stam Sifri, the Sifri is on Bamidbar and on Dvarim. That's Rabbi Shimon. That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. And where is this pasuk Me'echav located? It's in Sefer Dvarim. So therefore, the brisa on the psukim about kidnapping would be Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So then you've got this brisa that says, hey, and Rabbi Shimon says this. You can't have an argument between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, V'kula libra Rabbi Akiva. And by the way, everybody, all of these are the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, so they're all basing their positions in all of these brises on Rabbi Akiva Shita. So you shouldn't see real contradictions between any of these things and Rabbi Akiva. Okay, next. Unless otherwise specifically specified, we have arguments between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, that happens. Hagoneves beno, somebody who kidnaps his son.
Uh-oh.
So one says that he's liable, one says that he's not.
Why would he not be liable if he's kidnapping his son?
Oh, it's a good question,
Maybe
right?
Trafficking reasons.
So that's the first question. My time at the Rabbanan. What are the Rabbanan holding that if you kidnap your own son, you're not liable? Amar Rabbi, Damar Kra, because the pasuk says, Ki yimot say. Pasuk says that if you happen upon and find a person and you kidnap him, prat limotzui, that exempts somebody who is found by you all the time. Meaning, basically you're stealing somebody who is not commonly associated with you.
No,
That's how the pasuk is.
What is your divorce and you take in your kidnapping?
I was wondering that, right? In other words, you have all kind. You have a situation. Let's say, for example, your son doesn't live with you, right? Is that the same circumstance? It sounds like when you have a pasuk, when you have a pasuk, and the pasuk has an exemption like this, it applies 100% of the time. You can't say like the Chumash doesn't say that I'm exempting somebody under certain circumstances, but that would be, I guess, Dorish time of Dekra, right? Maybe there would be an argument, right? Dorish time of Dekra. The reason the rationality isn't applicable anymore. Once we've said a son is not liable, then a son's not liable. If you have a son that doesn't live with you, a son, it lives with your wife and you've never met before, it does not matter, right? You're not chayav. Rav Papa Abaye. So Rav Papa says Abaye. 1 second. If that's your opinion, El Meyata. When you see the word ki yimotze, it means to exclude people who are living with you or are available to you. How about this one? Ki yimotze ish shochev im isha boelas bal. When it comes to adultery, if a man finds a woman and has relations with her and she's married, so that's adultery, and that's going to be chayv misa. So achinami ki yimotze prat lemotzui. So you're going to explain it the same way. So if you have a circumstance where, for some reason, this woman is available to this man, so then that would not be adultery. Kagon, for example, shel beis ploni, deshchichan gabayhu. So there's this place called Beis Ploni, where apparently there were these groups of couples that were living together, sharing a house. Now, they don't mention who this Beis Ploni is, because it's a non-appropriate living arrangement, but they also don't out the people and say these are bad people, because they weren't doing any Averis. Just happened to be, right? They bought a big house, and each one each one was living in their own separate location, but not a tznius living arrangement, not ideal. They weren't thrilled with it, right? But if what you're saying is true, ki hi matzeh means that if you're living in that kind of arrangement, then adultery is mutter. right? Because they're available. Just like kidnapping your son is mutter. So in that circumstance, these women become mutter. Is that true? So hachinami diptiri. Some are lay. He says, no, that's not what I meant. He says it's from the fact the pasuk says that she's found, that this person is found in your hand, and that is not what it says. Ki motzei ishochev. It just doesn't say yimatze biyado, right? So therefore, it doesn't apply by the adultery case. It only applies by kidnapping. Amar Rava says hilkach honey. Yeah,
I'm trying to understand the case. Wait, a man kidnaps a married woman.
No. A man has adulterous relationships with a married woman that he is living in close proximity with.
Right.
And we said, based on the fact that you're not liable for kidnapping your son, based on the fact that he lives in close proximity with you, right. So that's why you're not liable for kidnapping. So we said this uses the same word, ki yamatze. So therefore, if you commit adultery with a woman living in close proximity with you, you shouldn't be liable.
Right.
Answer is no. That's not the full explanation of the drush was ki matze biyado, not ki matze. So it doesn't work, right? So, okay. So he says, Amar Rava says, Hilkach, therefore, Hani Mikri Dardiki, Umasar Rabbanon, Kimetsuyan Biyadon Damu Ptiri. He says, therefore, if that's true, school teachers or people who are students of rabbis, right? The kids are always with the rabbis, right? Then there's no they're putter from kidnapping. It's like kidnapping if they kidnap a child, right? So there we go. It's in our contract. Okay. So,
clearly states here.
Right. No, not fine. Putter for Misa. Putter for Misa. So it doesn't say it's mutter. It says putter for Misa. Ganav mi shechetzio. Okay, so now the next one is he kidnaps somebody who's half eved, half free. So Tanan Hasam, we learned in a Mishnah over there. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ein la'avadim boshes. When a slave gets injured, one of the things that the person who injures a slave does not have to pay is embarrassment. It's not required. My time to Rabbi Yehuda, why does Rabbi Yehuda say that? Amar Kro, the pasuk says, Ki yenatzu anashim yachdav, when men are fighting with each other, ish ve'echav, right? It's a man and his brother, right? So and under that context, the pasuk explains the requirement to pay for embarrassment that's caused when he does damage. Mish yoshvul achva, and so that means only the damage done by embarrassment only applies to somebody who has brothers. Yatsa Eved she'ein lo achva, but an Eved by definition can't have brothers. He was a Knani, he was a non-Jew. He's quasi-converted because he went to a mikvah when he became an Eved. He no longer is related to his parents or anybody else who's born in his family. And
this Eved was born Jew or not born.
So this is an Eved. You're right. It's a good point to make that. This clarifies that the Eved we're talking about is an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish person who was sold into slavery. That's right. It would stand to reason that an Eved Ivri, a Jewish slave, is a different category, and you would be liable for kidnapping for an Eved Ivri. Right? It's a good point. For Rabbanan achiv hu b'mitzvos, and the Rabbanan say, no, you are liable. Why? Because he's your brother in mitzvos. He has some mitzvos to do, and you have mitzvos to do, so therefore you cannot. Achva doesn't literally mean he can have brothers. Achva means that he is able to do mitzvos. V'hacha hechi darish Rabbi Yehuda. So in this circumstance, how does Rabbi Yehuda explain it? Savar me echav lafuki avodim. Says in our pasuk, right? Kimatze ish gonev nefesh me'echav mi bnei Yisrael, right? So it says me'echav mi bnei Yisrael. Has two different phrases here, right? So it's from his brethren and from bnei Yisrael. So me'echav, the word me'echav, lafuki avodim. So that's going to exclude somebody who's a slave. Bnei Yisrael lemute mi shechetzio efed v'chetzio ben chorin. And then the Jewish person says bnei Yisrael. So that's going to exclude somebody who's a half slave and half free, because we already excluded slaves. It's not going to exclude the Jewish person, because the Jewish person you're liable for.
What did the masters give up on him? Release them.
So now, mi b'nei Yisrael lemuti mi shechetzio eved v'chetzio ben chorin. So having miut achar miut. So we have this, what we call here a limiter after a limiter, right? One, we already knew an Eved was already not included. Then you put another pasuk in the way that tells you also not included. Then miut achar miut el rabos, we have a strange hermeneutic principle, which says that when the pasuk says no to something twice, it means yes.
So I have a question. You'd be putter from kidnapping, but would you be putter from stealing? Because technically a slave is owned.
Yeah, you're going to be chai for stealing.
You'd be chai
for stealing. Pay the damages. Yes,
right.
Yes. Right. The issue here at hand in this Gemara is discussing whether you're going to be chai of the Misa penalty for kidnapping. Right. As far as
other crimes
and things, potentially 100%. Okay. Now that's the Rabbi Yehuda's point of view. Says Rabbi Yehuda actually has from the drasha two different perspectives, right? So he says that since you heard from Me'achav that the payment of embarrassment isn't included, so he's going to use the same drasha for Echav by the kidnapping and say also slaves are not included, and then Bnei Yisrael is also going to exclude him a second time, and therefore he is included. And therefore it comes out that you are liable for stealing a half-slave, half-free person, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbanan, me'echav lafuke avodim lo mashmalu. The Rabbanan said that's not what echav means, because echav, you do have to pay boshes for a slave, because echav doesn't mean that. Echav just means that he has mitzvos, and he is obligated mitzvos. It just means you don't have to pay boshes for somebody who has no mitzvos, like a non-Jew. So now, daha achiv hu b'mitzvos, because this slave is, in fact, your brother as far as mitzvos is concerned. So therefore, there's no pasuk from me'achav to limit slaves. So therefore, Bnei Yisrael, chad miyuti eved, v'chad lumuti mishchatzer eved, v'chatzer ben chorin. So then it says, Bnei Yisrael, and then it has an extra mem, mi Bnei Yisrael. So that's going to come to exclude both a slave and somebody who's a half slave, half free, that you're not liable. So according to the Chum, you're not liable. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have too many words here. It's takes it out and then puts it right back in, and you are liable for half slave, half eved. That's the source of their psukim. Okay, so now up until this point, we were discussing the death sentence, right? In order to get a death penalty, you need to have a crime first. So you have a crime and then this death sentence for stealing, for kidnapping. Ashara l'gonev nefesh minayim. Where is the lo saseh? Where's the prohibition in the Torah against kidnapping? Rabbi Yeshaya says, Milo tignov. Pasuk says in the Aseres Adibros, lo tignov, do not steal, right? And that's kidnapping. Rabbi Yochanan says, Milo yimkru memkeres eved, right? He says it's from the Pasuk in Vayikra, right? That the Jewish people are my slaves, right? I took them out of Mitzrayim, and you should not sell them as slaves. And so therefore, that's where the prohibition is. Okay, velo pligi. But that is not an argument. Marka choshev lav de geneva, marka choshev lav de mechira. They're just dealing with two parts of the prohibition. One is actually stealing the person, and one is selling the person. And then the Torah tells us that if you do both, you get misa, right? So therefore, you see, there's actually a prohibition in either part. So that's either way. It's a lo saseh, and you can get malchus for either half, right? But you get misa for the second half. Tana Rabbanan, lo tignov. So pasuk says, lo tignov, do not steal. That's in the Seres Adibros. Begonev nefashos akasav medaber. So that pasuk is talking about kidnapping. Atam begonev nefashos, and we know begonev mammon. How do you know it's talking about kidnapping? Maybe it's just talking about stealing some money. Samart, so you say, Tseulamad mishlosh esrei midos shatorah nidreshes ben. You got to take a look at how the Torah's hermeneutical principles work, right? That means that there are rules. There are rules with how you are dorish psukim, and it works like this. We have one called davar halamed minyono, something which we learn from the context of the pasuk, right? Do not steal is written not by itself in a pasuk all by itself. It's written in a context of many other things there, like don't commit adultery and don't murder people. And in the Aseres Adibros. So b'makos medaber b'nefashos. Every other thing in that whole section is talking about things that you're chayav misa for. So avkan b'nefashos. So too, the kidnapping, the stealing here must be a kidnapping where you're chayav misa for it.
So the means look at context.
That's correct. Davar lo minyano means look at context, right? So if you are looking for a little kavanah when you read Rabbi Shmuel Omer in the morning, that's what that one means. Tanya Idach, another brisa says, lo tignovu, right? So this pasuk says, there's a pasuk that says, do not steal, right? This is in Vayikra Yud Tes, lo tignovu, v'lo tichachashu, v'lo tishakru, ishma miso, right? Not a lie, you can't cheat in business. That's what that pasuk is talking about. That's begonev mamon akos medaber. That pasuk is telling you you're not allowed to steal money. So Ata Omer begonev mamon oeina el begonev nefashos. That pasuk says don't steal. How do you know that pasuk is talking about stealing money and not stealing people? So Amart saying one mishlosh esrei midos shator and dresses pen. Same thing. Use the shlosh esrei midos. Davar lamed minyono. You have to look at the davar lamed minyono. But me'akos medaber. What's the pasuk talking about? B'mamon. That's talking about the whole pasuk area is talking about business and business dealings. So afkan b'mamon. So therefore the stealing over there is talking about money. Make sense? Good. Itmar. We learned in Brisa. We have said or made the following Amorite statement: "Edi geneva ve'edi mechira." Okay, now here's where it gets. This I was reading this Gemara now gets Brianish. Okay, because now right, as I said, there's a term which is where we analyze something in great detail and start to try to figure out, and everything somehow applies to a previous argument that we've learned once before somehow in some kind of a way, and he's right. So, and it goes like this. Now we've divided up this kidnapping into two sets of prohibitions, two prohibitions here, right? Stealing the person, selling the person, okay? Now we're going to go to Edom Zomimim, because it's one of Brian's favorite topics. Let's take a look at how Edom Zomimim now apply. What if you've got witnesses that testify? You can have a set of witnesses that testify that somebody stole the person, and another set of witnesses that he sold the person. Who's liable for what? Okay, so now, Ede Geneva ve'Ede Mechira benefesh shehuzmu, right? So these are Edom Zomimim. They testify, two witnesses testify about the stealing the person, two of them testify about the selling of the person. So Chizki Amar Ein Nerogin. Chizki says you can't kill either one of them, right? Because you've got no one witness that testified to the entire act of stealing and selling. So therefore, how could you be Chayav Misa? You're Chayav Loza say, right? So you're going to maybe get lashes for each of them, right?
Is this like Hotzah? Is that why? Is it because of the testimony or because of like
Hotzah is different. Yeah, but here's why. Shtaim is Patur, because there you have two people, one person doing half of the malacha, one person doing half of it.
These are two different malachas.
Two different malachas. Right. These two different averos, right? So you actually could be liable, but unlike Hotzah, kidnapping requires both of these averos to be done to get the misa.
Interesting, yeah, because they're two different places where we learn one from the Seres Adibros and the other one. So that is
two averos, right. But you got to do both of them in order to get misa. So now it's interesting.
It's interesting if you do them separately. Sorry, you're already chayev for right. If I do one, I'm chayev. If I do the other one, I'm chayev. Now you're saying I'm chayev on top of that. Misa. Another one. Like it would be.
That's sort of what it looks like, right? If I stole the person and let's say I keep him, and he's working in my possession as my slave, right? So it's a losase, and I'm stealing, and I owe money for the damages or whatever it is. But then I go and I sell him. Now I'm chayav misa. I don't have to pay the monetary damages, right? That's basically how we're looking at it. Rabbi Yochanan says ner rogin. Rabbi Yochanan says you can kill the witnesses because ultimately, once all the testimony is in, the guy who was kidnapping was going to be chayav misa. And now these Edom Zomim, we're trying to kill him, and they are Chayav Misa. Okay, now, Chizkiah Damar Rabbi Akiva. Chizkiah is going to hold, who says that you're not able to kill them, is like Rabbi Akiva, Damar Davar velo Chatzi Davar. Rabbi Akiva holds that the Torah requires that testimony be about an entire thing, not half of a thing. Therefore, since each of these Edom Zomim only testified to half of the testimony that was required to give the Misa, you can't give either of them the misa because that's not what they schemed to do because they didn't testify to the entire thing. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar Karabanan, the Rabbi Yochanan disagrees and he holds like the Rabbanan to Amri Davar va'afilu Chatzi Davar. He say that a testimony to half of the crime is going to be sufficient to make them liable for the eventual death that they cause.
I just have one question. I'm sorry. Because there's two different pesukim in two different places where we learn the whole thing, how could you say it's Chayav Misa? There's no single pasuk that says, if you do this specifically.
Sure there is. Yeah. Pasuk says, right? The pasuk is Ki matei whatever is it? Ki matei ish gonev nefesh me'achav mi-bnei Yisrael v'yis amar bo u'machran u'meis haganavahu.
Okay, so why don't we learn about kidnapping from there? Why is it that I have to break two different pesukim down?
Because that's the punishment. We need an azhara, right? We need both. We have one pasuk that tells us the punishment, and then we have the other pesukim that tell us the lo saseh. That's always the structure, right? If a person, that pasuk just says that if a person kidnaps and uses the person and sells him, then he gets misa. Okay, and then the other pesukim say prohibition against stealing, prohibition against selling. Okay, so now I've got my two prohibitions, and then ultimately another pasuk that says, and when these two things happen, you get misa.
Okay.
Right? That's the structure. Now, Mordechai. This is where Chizkiah was expecting, but he was focused on the other. This was Brian's question that he didn't ask yet. I was waiting for this question. Chizkiah is going to agree, though, be'edim ha'achronim shall ben sorer mora. What happens about the second witnesses about Ben Sora Mora? The second witnesses in Ben Sora Mora, because here we have a similar circumstance by Ben Sora Mora. We said that the Ben Sora Mora steals from his parents, right? And they bring him into court. And then at that point, he gets Malchus. And then they let him go back out there again. He does it again. His parents bring him back in, and now he gets killed. He gets skila. What if you have two separate sets of witnesses that bring him in each time? Okay, so the first set is Malkus. The second set is Misa. Okay, what happens if the Edom Zomimim, there's only Zomimim on the second set, not on the first set? Okay, so in that circumstance, Chizkiah is going to agree, right, of the second set of witnesses of Ben Sora Moreh, Shehuz Moshe Nerogin, they can be put to death. Why? Mitoch Shecholim Lomar Harishonim Lehalkoso Pevavim Beis Banu. We only came in order to give him Malchus. The first set said, what did we do? We brought him to court. We said he stole. We had no intention of having this kid get killed. We thought we were just going to get him Malchus. We didn't like the kid. We didn't get him beaten up, right? So he got beaten up. We were done. Then comes another set of witnesses, and they brought him back to court. That's all on them. They put him to death. It's not us. So therefore, Chizkiah would say, okay, that's a good point. The first set of witnesses has nothing to do with the second set of witnesses. Therefore, the second set of witnesses can get Misa because their entire testimony, they basically have no one to blame for the person getting put to death but themselves. Okay? V'hani achrini kuli dover ka'avdi. So therefore, the second set is really doing a full testimony that's going to get the person killed. Okay, so not whereas when it comes to selling, right, the kidnapping case, it's not the case. Because if these people were to only, I guess, testify by itself about the sale, we're going to see, that would not be sufficient testimony, right? Because otherwise, as we're going to see, how do you know that the person isn't selling his own slave? Right? You don't know who the person he's selling is. You have to be able to have a testimony. It's dependent on the first testimony that the person got kidnapped first. Then comes the second testimony that he was sold.
I also wonder what happens if you go in front of a judge, you're charged for Geneva, and then later you're charged for could you be charged for, because it's like the same thing, you're being charged for the same act twice.
Yes, and that's exactly what's happened. That's why you have two sets of witnesses.
Right.
You're charged for stealing, and then you're charged for selling. And
once you're judged, that's it. Once you're chayav something, can you be chayav? Could you
yes.
be brought for the same crime? Isn't that
because you're not being brought for the same crime? Your crime is escalating.
Right, but
you were brought for stealing somebody. Now you're being brought for kidnapping.
Right, but you're still you're taking into action something you've already been. You're already being if you got the malchus of already
got the malchus, you're right.
Can
do it again? Yeah, that's it.
You can't do it again.
No, you get the Misa.
You have three strikes.
Is there a criminal record system in the Gemara?
That they would have to keep track of all of these things? It's a good question, right? You would need witnesses somehow, or the Beis Din to be aware of the first crime. Because if what happened was he was tried in one court and in one country, and then they only caught him with selling people in the second country, then you're right. They would have no way of recording that one was versus the other. And even if they kept a criminal record system and it was all recorded in a computer somewhere, where that wouldn't be testimony. They would still have to somehow call up previous witnesses from the first case to either testify again that they saw the what do you call it, the stealing, or at least testimony that somebody saw Beis Din come to a conclusion that he was convicted of that crime.
Have to be the same person.
Computerized records, but the Beis Din have their stamped document uploaded on there.
That's a good question, right? Yeah, it would seem that I wonder if you could have digital signatures, right? Whether you could have digital signatures be equal to a live signature in halacha. Okay, these are good halachos. These are good questions to ask. That we should look in contemporary halacha and society magazine or something to find out whether you can have a digitally signed ksuba or something like that, whether it's effective or not, or how that works.
We should create that magazine here.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, yeah. So Beli Neder, we have to write some of these down because my intention was to go searching during the day for articles online that deal with these issues. So and post them if I can find. So I'm going to see if we can find halachic digital signatures, whether that works or not. Maskiv lo Rav Papa. So Rav Papa asked a fine question. If that's true, so then Edi Mechira Nami Likdelei, then if this is true, well, let's take a look at our kidnapping case. In our kidnapping case, right, the first group, right, the second group should also get Misa. Why? The first witnesses say, well, we saw the guy kidnap the person, or stole the person, but we never saw him sell him. Could they come to Beis Din and claim that, well, we only wanted to give him Malchus? Because without the testimony about the sale of the person that they kidnapped, there's no Misa. It's only Losase. So therefore they could say, well, we testified that the person was stolen from his house, and now you're going to get malchus for stealing him from his house. Comes along the second guys that go, great, now we have a great opportunity to get even with this guy. And the second guys pop into court and say, yeah, we saw him sell him too, and now there should be chayav misa, because their testimony is sort of independent in the same way that the testimony of Ben Sora Mora is. Right. Okay, good. Maybe the answer is Chizkiah holds that the first set of witnesses doesn't get malchus for his first crime, but that is not true, because he says, Edi Geneva benefesh shehuzmu. Let's say you have somebody who has testified that somebody has kidnapped a person, not the sale part, but just the stealing part. Chizkiah of Rabbi Yochanan. It is an argument between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan. Chad amar lokin v'chad amar ein lokin. One says you get lashes for that, and one says you don't get lashes for that. Ve'amrinon, and we came to the conclusion on that brisa. It's time to Chizkiah to Amar Lokin. It's Chizkiah who says that they get malchus, which means that why we're going to say that would mean to Amar Chizkiah, because Chizkiah says ain't nerogin. He says that at the end, the fact that the second group comes in and testifies, they can't get killed for being edim zomimim against the second half of the crime. Di Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, came to Amar nerogin havalei lav shenitan las hars misas beistin. Well, if it was because according to Rabbi Yochanan, he holds that the second set of witnesses actually can get killed, and so can the first set of witnesses. That's how Rabbi Yochanan looks. He says the whole thing is all tied together. So if the person ends up being convicted of kidnapping, Rabbi Yochanan says the witnesses for the first part of the Avera and the second part of the Avera both get killed. Well, so then that means that this whole thing winds up being what we call a lav shenitan las haras misas beistin. That's a losase. This is what Brian wanted to know. He says, well, I don't understand. You give the person lashes and then you come back and you give him misa? Not according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, when I have the losase, that ultimately can turn into a misas based in, the malchus is suspended, right? The malchus is suspended because it might ultimately turn into a case of misas based in. So therefore, no malchus can be given for stealing the person if in the end he might be chayav misa. Okay, good. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, right, he says that the first set of witnesses can't come in and say, we wanted to give the guy malchus, because they couldn't give him malchus, because there is no malchus in the first half, right? So therefore, he comes later. He says, in the second half, they can get misa, because they were all included in this one testimony to ultimately get this guy misa, because that's the only punishment. There'd be no reason for you coming to court and testifying about this guy unless you were part of the scheme to ultimately get him misa. So therefore, everybody gets misa. That's Rabbi Yochanan's perspective. To which Chizkiah says, no, we don't give either the first set or the second set misa. Well, what's the chiddush? He says, if you're not giving the first set malchus because maybe the second set's going to get misa, well, if the second set doesn't get misa either, then why wouldn't the first set be able to get malchus? It's not connected to the eventual misa that's going to occur. So therefore, the first set could get malchus. So therefore, it's Chizkiah's perspective that the first set get malchus and the second set get malchus. Let's read that again in the Gemara. Right? Di Rabbi Yochanan, if it's Rabbi Yochanan, Kevin Damar Neragin, Havali Lav Shenitan Las Hars Misas Beistin, then this is considered to be a losase that ultimately the person could possibly get killed for. The Chol Lav Shenitan Las Hars Misas Beistin ain't Lokin Olav. So he says all prohibitions that can ultimately lead to a Misas Beistin, you can't give malchus for the first half of that part of that Avera. So therefore, Ihu lo lucky, inhu hechi laku. So therefore, if the person himself who is charged with kidnapping can't get lashes, how could the Edom Zomim get lashes? So therefore, if you have an argument between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan as to whether the first set of witnesses can get lashes or not, well, it's clearly Rabbi Yochanan who says that you can't get lashes because he holds that the kidnapper can't get lashes. For sure, the Edom Zomim can't get lashes. Well, then, by process of elimination, who's the one who holds that you do get lashes? Chizkiah is the one who holds that you do get lashes. So therefore, if Chizkiah holds that you do get lashes, so then that means that when the first set of witnesses come in and they say, well, wait a second, why should we get Misa? We only intended to testify about the first half of the crime and get him some lashes. So it should be exactly like the Ben Sora Mora case, where the first set should get lashes and the second set should get Misa. So we're in a bit of a bind and a struggle figuring out how to understand Chizkiah's perspective. Elamar of Papa. So Rav Papa says, I knew you'd like it. Be'edei Mechira, when it comes to witnesses of the sale, Dekuli Amalo Pligi Denerogin. You're right. Change it. Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, they're all agreeing that the second set of witnesses that testify about the sale, they are going to get Misa. Because no way of looking at it any other way. Rabbi Yochanan says the whole thing is all one testimony, so therefore they're going to get killed. And according to Chizkiah, says the first set is out of the picture already. They already gave him the Malchus. The second set are the ones that give him the Misa, therefore they get Misa. Ki pligi, the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah is Be'ede Geneva, is only about the witnesses to the first part of the crime, where they actually do the kidnapping. Chizkiah Amar Ein Neragin, Chizkiah says they don't get killed because Geneva Lechuda Kaima, Umechira Lechuda Kaima, they are two separate Averos, and therefore two separate testimonies, and therefore each one can be a separate testimony. And Rabbi Yochanan says Neragin, and Rabbi Yochanan says that they get Misa. Why? Because Aschalta de Mechirahi. This is the stealing of the person is a setup ultimately for the sale. It's all one eventual crime, and he looks at it as all together. Umod Rabbi Yochanan's going to agree. Be'edim harishonim shel ben sorah moreh, but Rabbi Yochanan's going to agree that when it comes to the witnesses, the first witnesses of a ben sorah moreh, that shehuzmu, if they get hazama, she'ein neragin, they don't get killed. Even though Rabbi Yochanan normally says, look, at the end of the day, they got killed, so the first set of witnesses is all tied in together. He says that's not the case. Because when it comes to Edom Zom, when it comes to ben sorah moreh, one can indeed argue that those two things are separate. The Malchus is intended as a warning to prevent the kid from continuing to go down this way, so the witnesses theoretically could say, we only wanted to give him Malchus. Whereas he can't, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he cannot say that by the kidnapping, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, they don't get Malchus when all you do is Geneva, because it's what we said was a lav sheniton lazhars misas based in. It is a losase, which ultimately leads to an eventual death penalty. They don't get Malchus after the Geneva. They only wait until after the Misa.
But the second set of witnesses might have not even known about the first part.
Coming up.
That would have been
next Gemara. It's good. He always does this. Okay, good. Amar Abayi says, okay, to wrap this up to get to the Mishnah and answer that question. Amar Abayi says, Hakol modim beben sorah moreh. Everyone agrees when it comes to ben sorah. Hakol modim beben sorah moreh, umachlokas beben sorah moreh. There's two things that everybody agrees about ben sorah moreh, and one thing that they disagree on. Hakol modim beben sorah moreh be'edim harishonim she'ein neragin. Everybody agrees that when it comes to ben sorah moreh, the first set of witnesses do not get killed, because all they did was require lashes. Because all we said, all they did was come and say, they could say we only can give them lashes. Everyone agrees by ben sorah moreh that the second set of witnesses for sure they do get killed as Edom Zomim. Because the first set of witnesses are out of it already. They're not part of it. They can say, well, it's clear that you came as second set of witnesses in order to give them the Misa. Vahani kuli davar ka'avdi. These people are therefore doing the entire testimony. Umachlokas beben sorah moreh. The machlokas is beben sorah moreh. Shnai momrim befan of ganav, ushnai momrim befanenu achal. What happens if each one testifies? Each set of witnesses testifies to half of the circumstance. Right? Remember that in each case up until this point, we've saying that one set of witnesses says he stole and he ate, and then a second set comes and says he stole and he ate again. But what happens if the testimony in the first place was one says he stole and one says he ate? You have two witnesses to the stealing, two witnesses to the eating. In that circumstance, that's the argument between chatzi davar and full davar. According to the opinion that says that they have to testify to the entire event, it's not an entire event. According to the opinion that says even half the event, you could say this one testified to half the problem, this one testified to half the problem, and you can have them.
The fact he stole it, would that be like a forbidden food? The fact he stole it?
Well, it's not forbidden food; it's stolen food. But yes, but the question is, what is the technical details of the testimony that's needed? Right? Do you need to be the same witnesses that testify? That's the question, right? That's ultimately, if he did that, you're right. Then he's chayiv, right? The question is two sets of witnesses enough? And that's dependent, as Exer Zakasa, basically, the pasuk says that half of a testimony is not enough. Amar Ravasi says, Edi mechira benefesh shehuzmu, ein neheragin. Okay, so Ravasi says that witnesses, this is the issue that you were dealing with, the witnesses of the sale of a person that become Edom Zomim, ein neheragin. They are not killed. Why? Because they can say, well, 1 second, the guy can claim, right, to get himself off the hook. How can you be an Edom Zomim? All I'm testifying is the fact that he sold. So that means that the person who I'm testifying against has an alibi. He could say, I was selling my own slaves. I wasn't selling anybody I was not allowed to sell. What are you testifying? That I sold somebody? You're right, I did. I sold somebody I was legally able to sell. So what's the problem? So if that's the case, so if then the court says, well, wait a second, we've got these other witnesses that came this morning, and they testified that you stole the person, you kidnapped the person. Now we're combining the two things together. You're chayiv. That's not the second set of witnesses problem. Right. They didn't testify to that.
Right.
So therefore they shouldn't get misa.
Right.
Okay. Amar of
and they didn't testify really against anything because it's not.
There you go. Amar of Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Keman Azal, who does that opinion go? Hashmaisa Ravasi, this is what Ravasi says. It's Rabbi Akiva. This is like Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Damar davar velo chatzi davar. The guy has to testify the entire action. He can't testify to half the action. You can't have two witnesses saying that he saw part of the offense and two witnesses saying he saw the other part of the offense and then combine them together to make a full offense. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, De'ikar Rabbanan nerok. And that means what you're saying is that according to the rabbis, Ravasi's point is that he would get killed. Ha mitoch kamar. He says, but that's not true. What was the reason why Ravasi said what he said? He said the guy's got an alibi. That's why they're not liable. It's not because of a technical difficulty that these witnesses told half the story. These witnesses told half the story. It was because even when these guys, the second witnesses, came to testify, since the person who was on trial had the alibi to say it was my guy that I was selling. That's why he's not liable. Ella filu temer rabbanan. So therefore, in this case, even the rabbanan are going to agree with Ravasi. Ubidalo asi edi geneva. But this only works if the first set of witnesses didn't come yet, right? Because if the first set of witnesses did come, okay, then you can have no alibi. You can't say it was my guy because literally these guys are sitting in the front row of the court case watching the second court case going, hey, we just testified the guy kidnapped him. Okay? So Ravasi's point is it's only because he has the alibi that we don't kill those witnesses. If he has no alibi, then we are going to kill the second set of witnesses. If that's true, Mila Memra, so then what's the big deal? I mean, that's fairly obvious, right? The guy's got an alibi, so then you can't kill, he wouldn't get killed, so you don't kill the Edom Zomim. No, I do need a daf. The answer is because the witnesses could come out of order, right? So he says what could happen is the first case of the day is that he sold the people. Then second case is we saw him kidnap that guy. Okay, you might think that you can't put the second set of guys to death, right? But that has to be before Gemar Din, right? Because if there was a Gemar Din at that point, you didn't have the first case taken care of, then they wouldn't make him chayav misa. So what basically has to happen is you've got two court cases happening simultaneously. One court is sitting here listening to the case in which he sold the guy. Before they finish the court case, another court is sitting and having a discussion about whether he kidnapped the guy, right? Even though the testimony about the sale happened before the testimony about the stealing of the fellow, these guys could be held liable. Says Ravasi, no, because they could say, at the time we testified,
we didn't know about the other
right?
one.
The guy had the excuse.
Not only that, but if this court case finishes first, and they're chayiv,
so that's for sure the case,
can't
right?
go back and say, but
that's why that's why they deal with it as the both cases have to both be taking place at the same time. Because once the guy was patur already and the Beis Din already decided that, then
it's over.
Vakasi ma'ila meimra. So still, what are you going to say? He says, still, what's the big deal? I mean, ultimately, the guy's got an alibi. There's no other testimony yet. What's Ravasi's point is fairly obvious. No, de kamaramzi remuze. What happened is the witnesses that are testifying about the sale are winking at these other guys that are going to come right afterwards to the other court and testify that you'd think that there's some kind of communication. How are you going to, you guys that are Edom Zomim, you're off the hook because you didn't know that some other testimony was going to come later? Look at you guys. You're sitting there signaling to each other, waving. You guys know each other. Something is really fishy. Says Ravasi. He says, so Ma'odatim, what would you think? Remiza Milsa. You might have thought that hinting, that thing is coming along is suspicious and you should be Mechayev these Edom Zomim Misa because they're clearly in cahoots with the other guys even though they haven't testified yet. Kamashmel and Remiza Lav Klum. Therefore, the Gemara said, the Ravasi's point is, those hints are nothing. They're meaningless halachically, and therefore you cannot be mechayev, and you cannot say that their testimony is now based on the presumption that they knew about this other testimony that hasn't happened yet. You can only go based on what was actually testified.
When you get this set of witnesses that comes and says that he saw this guy's cell, they would have to know that he's kidnapped, otherwise what are they doing there? Right?
Yeah, but they can say we have suspicion. It's a good point. They have to be able. There's no crime being committed here. Otherwise, what are they sitting in based and testifying about something that hasn't happened, right? But I guess, yeah.
How is it a part two to a testimony
that hasn't happened yet? Right. So clearly, it seems like maybe people are talking about it, right? This guy's a kidnapper and he's stealing. He's a human trafficker and he's selling. We saw him sell these people. Something weird is going on, but just that weird behavior or that suspicion doesn't meet the criteria of an actual testimony. And until these other two witnesses actually do come and testify, it doesn't change anything.
It's funny because the Mishnah outlines it differently. The Mishnah says if you kidnap somebody, you bring him into your reshus and you get him to do a maisa.
Yes,
that's it.
Right.
You be chayiv misa.
No? Yes. Although it does say the word mechira from the pasuk.
Anything about being machar, like to be
the pasuk. Because right, the sale. I guess the Mishnah seems to take the sale for granted. So according to the opinion that says that the work is not needed, which we said the work is needed, but it doesn't have to be a pruta. If you bought the person, didn't use him at all, and then sold him immediately,
right, then
you would not be chayiv because you didn't do any of the use. So you have to kidnap him, use him, and then sell him.
Right. But if I chas v'shalom kidnapped somebody, brought him to my house, and made him clean my bathroom, I don't know. I'm a chayiv misa at that.
Not yet, not until you sell him.
TMI.
So you didn't say it in the Mishnah.
So I want to make sure that's clear, right? Now that we see from the end of the Gemara, that seems to be clear. Let's do the Mishnah because when at least turn the page to make sure we do 1.5 pages to stay on our pace. Says the Mishnah, Zokein Mamre. The next case is a rebellious elder. Al Beistin. He rebels against Beistin. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Ki poli mimcha davar lemishpat. If you have some kind of a court case, which is which the resolution is removed from you. So then the pasuk continues on and gives a whole. We'll read the psukim next time. Tomorrow we'll start with the psukim. Shlosha batei dinin hayusham. There are 3 courts that were in the Beis Hamikdash area. Echad yoshev al Pesach Harbayis. One was sitting by the opening of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, we had the whole thing. So the opening of the courtyard, based in number 1. Those 23 judges. V'echad yoshev al Pesach Hazora. Then inside, opening to the Azara, to the actual courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, was another based in 23 judges. V'echad yoshev belishkas hagazis. And then inside the Azara of the Beis Hamikdash was the chamber of hewn stone. The Lishkas Hagazis, that's where the Sanhedrin of 71 sat. That's where these 3 Beis-Dins were on the Har Bayis. Boyin Lezeh. So now, you've got this elder who has a dispute with his local Beis-Din. They think the halacha is one way, he thinks the halacha is another way. Boyin Lezeh, Shal Pesach Har Bayis, they go to the first Beis-Din. The Omer, Kach darashti v'kach darshu chaverai. He says, this was my opinion, this is what the other guy said. And he's refusing to yield. Kach limadati v'kach limdu chaver. This is what I taught. This is what my friends taught. Im sham'o amar lehem. If this Beis Din says, hey, you know what? We have a tradition from our teachers. And so they tell him, this is what our tradition, our teachers. Vim lav. But if they have no tradition, they don't hear the case and then vote on it. Right. They just are deciding whether, in fact, this has already been decided in the past. So if not, so then boin lehen la'osan shal pesach hazara. They then all go to the next court. They move up, appeals, right? Go right up to the next court, by the opening of the Azara. V'omar, they do it again. Kach darashti v'kach darshi chaver kach imadati v'kach limdu chaverai. Im shamu, if they heard of something, Amar let me say. Then they say it to them. Im lav, and if not, then they all go to the Sanhedrin. So that's quite a procession. Everybody's going to the Sanhedrin and ask a shaila. There's where all of the Torah from Kahal Yisrael gets decided. Supreme Court. Shenamar pasuk says, from that place which Hashem chose. Now, based there, the Sanhedrin votes, and that's that. Okay? Case closed. Chazer li'iro. Now, the guy goes home, back to his city. Shana v'limed keder shahaya limed. He continues to teach, this was my opinion. So, Pater, that's fine. And there's no avera of saying this was the way that I learned the psukim. That's fine. V'im hora lasos, but if he says, and you need to teach, and you need to do what I said, because this is the conclusion, and this is the halacha, then he's chayev. Right? He can't teach to do the halacha. He's chayev chenek. Shenemar va'isha sheyaseh bazadon. He's a man who does on purpose. Eno chayev ad sheyora lasos. He's not chayev until he teaches everybody to do it. Talmud shehora lasos pater. Also, the other thing is he has to be a musmach. He has to be a zakim, which means he has to be somebody who has smich already. Cannot be a student. Right? If he's usually they give the smich around 40 years old or so. So if he's that's why they call him the zakim. If he was a student. And he didn't have, he's teaching. Nobody's going to pay attention to him because it's not at the level where he's arguing with the Sanhedrin. But if he's already a musmach, who is a member, who's roy to be a member of a Beis Din or a Sanhedrin, then he's more serious. Nimtza chumro kulo, which means that the stringency winds up being the leniency, right? Says the we'll explain. Says the Gemara. Taner Rabbanan. Rabbis learn kifal mimchad davar. Right. If something is unknown to you, pay zayin and aleph. B'muflo shebe based in akasav medaber. So pasuk says that this is discussing. Second, my page. This is somebody talking. Has to be somebody who is appropriate to be elevated to the title of being on a base din. Pasuk is talking about this. Then pasuk. This is going to go through all of the pasuk. So what we're going to do is we'll stop here. Just at least we got onto Pei Zayin Amah. But we're going to take out we're going to come with Chumashim tomorrow. Just be able to look through because this brisa goes word by word through.